Welcome back, everyone. We're now on to item 8. We've got two of our staff here, Lisa and Kerry, and online we have Adam and Anthony to talk about the Ōtautahi Christchurch Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory Report. So, fire away.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So we commissioned ACOM to update our information on greenhouse gas emissions in the Christchurch district, and this is to present the results. It's the Christchurch Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventory for the financial year 2023. The report shows some positive trends, with gross emissions decreasing by 12% between 2019 and 2023. Climate change results from the cumulative building up of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere over time. So it's a positive that we as a district added less to that accumulation. The report also highlights, with the figures from the baseline year of 2017, that there's still a way to go before achieving the target set by the council, which is to be net neutral excluding methane by 2045. So the report contains a range of figures and statistics, and to help us answer any questions that you may have, along with Kerry and I, we've got the experts from ACOM who did the report, Adam and Anthony. So we take the report as read and open up to your questions.
Okie dokie. Thank you very much. Councillor Kewen, please.
Yeah, and I'm actually happy to move this one, by the way, as well, Mr. Mayor. It's great that we are receiving this. My concern is page 106, stationary energy, 21%, and you've got the coal-fired power plant symbol there, and it's showing that 33% of our energy is coming from coal and 17% from LPG. But that's the national model. And how often have we clarified how often the electricity is travelling south across the Cook Strait?
Yes, I'm not sure. Is Adam and Anthony online?
Do you want to answer that question?
I've always had a beef with this, so it's not new.
But it's partly just to clarify. So the stationary energy here includes electricity, but it also includes coal, like industrial coal use within the district,
Schools
or
and stuff.
LPG. Yeah, anything within the district that's using coal. So this is that one there is not just electricity supply. So 37% of that. 21% is electricity.
ACOM, would you like to add to that? Can they?
Yeah, just to kia ora, everyone, just to confirm that one. Yeah, the coal there is not related to energy generation or electricity generation. That is one of the slight areas where we weren't able to get great data, and we highlight that in the report, where better data on coal consumption in Christchurch would improve the report. Right,
so we're not using that old model on the electricity thing coming from the North Island, or we are?
The electricity consumption figure there that says 37% of stationary energy, that is related to national energy generation in the country, the energy generation mix, yeah. Right,
and also on that particular one as well, the total number there is 87%, and I know they've used Swedish rounding, but where's the other 13% of energy coming? Because even 13 is a considerable number.
That would be some diesel and petrol use in stationary forms. Let me have a think.
So probably in future ones, it'll be good to have that, because transitioning people away from using stationary diesel and petrol is, if they can switch to solar panels and all sorts, is a much better outcome. So having a lens on it is good. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Johansson, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to understand just how we can get consistency of measurement. Did I note in the report that ECAN have a slightly different model, and obviously central government are doing their thing as well? So I'm just wondering if someone can just talk to how we can come up with the same measurements so that we can, compare apples with apples rather than apple and oranges.
Yeah, Adam, do you want to take that one in terms of the methodology and the GHG protocol which you're using for this district level inventory?
Yeah, kia ora. There's different ways of measuring greenhouse gas emissions. We did reach out with ECAN to try and align what we're doing with what they're doing, and they're coming from quite a different perspective. They're also covering a calendar year where we're looking at the financial year, and they're also looking at 2021 as their most recent year as opposed to 2023. So we ended up with the understanding that they're not going to align perfectly, and that this FY23 result is the most useful for Christchurch.
And just to add to that as well, there is a lot of work with our regional partners and with other TAs, talking to government in terms of that standardisation, and that you're acknowledging all TAs are trying to measure their emissions, and having like a standardised model that everyone could use would be a lot simpler and more efficient for everybody.
So has the Merrill Forum adopted the same standards of measurement?
They're at an earlier stage, so they're just looking at essentially measuring emissions.
Sorry, just to ask a really stupid question. Given that we've got a model, I don't understand why every council wants to come up with a different model. If we've come up with, a measurement, why can we not say to the other councils through the Merrill Forum or ECAN, can you just adopt the same measurement that we've got, given that we've been one of the first to do it?
I'd maybe throw that back to ACON to explain the standardness of the methodology that's used here.
Sure. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Perfect. So the methodology is actually a mayoral initiative across the globe. So we use the global protocol for cities and community scale emissions, and that's a global standard used across many countries, not just New Zealand. The US has been used in, I would say, for 90, if not now 100% of the local authorities or the TAs are using emission reductions for New Zealand. So that is the most standard measurement out there. I believe the ECAN study also focused on air pollution, which is a slightly different approach from just looking at greenhouse gas emissions, and so would have taken into account a number of other factors in the way that they approached that particular study. Very confident that this methodology is a global standard that's been used many times, hundreds of times across the globe, and is used widely in New Zealand.
Right, but just not with our existing councils within our Merrill Forum. But can I just, the second kind of issue for me is the cruise ships. I don't know if you heard the presentation. So, I've previously put forward that we look at having some sort of environmental offset levy on the cruise ships that are coming to Christchurch. In terms of recognising the huge impact that cruise ship emissions have and how much we're having to account, for that, what thought have we given to mitigations to offset the impact of the cruise ship emissions? Use of levies, use of other things to counter that.
So this data is new, and I understand it's the first time this is being done in New Zealand. So it's early days for us to think about how we would respond to this data. Having said that, in terms of cruise ships, there's a wide range of things to consider. So climate change emissions is one. Then you would need to consider tourism and transport policy, economic policy, the other environmental issues involved in cruise ships. If you were to do something about it, you'd need to consider what legal options and ability council might have to regulate. You'd also want to consider the infrastructure. So, for example, if the port were at some point able to offer cruise ships the ability to plug in electric when they're here, and could that amount of electricity be supplied? So there's actually a lot to unpack. And then, although the report shows an estimate that it could be that cruise ships are a significant part of the emissions, they're actually not as significant as, for example, land transport, where we have more advanced plans to take action. So there's a lot to consider.
I guess I'm also concerned that the buses that they're using would predominantly probably be diesel. So they've generated a huge use of diesel buses to come to transport people when they arrive.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the process is. What's the process for us responding to the information? Should we be passing resolutions today, or is there another process underway to look at what we can do?
Does Lynn or Mary like to comment on that in terms of process?
Lynn, I don't think we are.
So the report today is really to summarise the inventory and to give you the information. There is a report coming to Council in May, which is an update on the actions being taken to address our targets and the indicative next steps. That would be the more appropriate time for us to consider the next steps and whether a cruise ship levy or equivalent should form part of that body of work.
Sorry. Councillor Coker. Oh, sorry, it's a question online, is it? I'm sorry, I didn't miss. You've had your two. So you didn't have a question. I thought you were just waving. Okay. Councillor Cotter.
When the are you talking? Is this report about the city-wide emissions, or the council's goals for the council's reductions?
This report is about the city and district's emissions. We will be doing a report on the council's operational emissions that will come to you in May.
So that's when we set that goal of the council becoming the certain goals we had by 2045.
So there's two different lots of targets. For the
Yes.
council, we've got a target to be net neutral by 2030 for our operational emissions.
Yes.
And the targets in this report are by 2045 for the whole district to be
Right.
net neutral by 2045 and to halve by 2030.
Great. It was quite good to sort of note that at the beginning of the report, just to remind us all of those two targets. And on page, what is it? 1, 2, 3. You've noted here that per capita, because noting that we're seeing a population increase, and per capita, the emissions are really have decreased by 14% rather than 12. So why would we not use that target, that number instead of 12? Is it a more realistic number, or is it just a different way?
I mean, it's positive that, as the population grows, our emissions aren't growing in line with that. So it is a greater proportion of reduction on a per capita basis. But our targets aren't on a per capita basis. It is just the total volume of emissions going into the atmosphere that matters. Obviously, with more people, it's harder to bend that curve down. But ultimately, the atmosphere, it doesn't impact on that.
So in actual fact, it is a very good story that even though we've got a higher population, per capita it's decreased, but the quantum is only decreased by 12%. But it still means, and I think we need all the positive messages we can get to keep people on track to get on board this. And the other thing is, does the data include, I'm not sure of the timing of the report, but all the new electric buses that ECAN is now using? I mean, do we know what percentage of their fleet is electrified now?
So, ACOM, do you want to answer that to begin with?
Good question.
This is up to the financial year 2023, so up till the end of June 2023.
Right.
We have included the electric buses that were included up to that point.
At that time, but I think they may have got quite a few more since June. Well, that can be a good story.
So the next report, will show that difference.
And when is
in May.
that?
Yeah, good question.
When's the next report?
The reports are done every 3 years.
Oh,
But our council ones will be done annually for our council operational emissions, but the district-wide one, we're looking at every 3 years currently.
jeepers.
This is a city-wide one at the moment. isn't it?
Yeah, the citywide one.
This
yeah.
will a city-wide one like we see here, and I love these wee graphics. That's every year.
It's every 3 years.
Every 3 years.
The reason why it's every 3 years, apart from that it has a cost attached to produce it, is that you will see in the report there is some fluctuation year by year. So if you did it annually, you wouldn't actually get that much of a trend. You'd get a headline that maybe would be, we went up, we went down. But over the 3 year period, you get to see more of a picture of the trend of what's actually happening.
Yeah. So, and Environment Canterbury will be doing their own one, correct?
For the whole region, yeah.
The region. Right.
I
because,
don't know how.
Noting that the majority of
they'll
the
do it.
emissions are from transport and the majority of the transport ones are from the buses, it would be good to get some sort of a good news story there coming from, but if it's difficult then, isn't it? It's only every 3 years. Okay.
Councillor Templeton, please.
Kia ora, thank you. A couple of things. Firstly, it looks like the areas that have seen a decrease tend to be in areas where there's no council kind of sort of control or influence, such as the post-COVID, the COVID impact on airlines, the electricity supply with the water, those kind of things. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the biggest fluctuations is also in the national grid and the mix of renewable energy from year to year, with dry years or wet years in the lakes there. But there are areas, such as transport and waste, that council really has the big, impact or levers that we can use there.
Yeah, but in those spaces where council can have influence, we're actually not yet making the difference. Is that right?
Yeah, there's been quite a small change in transport emissions over that time, but going back to the per capita issue, as actually, even though our population's growing, those transport emissions aren't growing in line with population, so that's a good thing there. But so there is a positive change in that way, I guess.
But when it comes to the actual impacts on our climate, the physics don't take into account how many people we've got. It's just how much carbon's in the air. That's right.
Yeah.
So the other one is, I guess, it's the next stage, which is the report talks about this being useful for helping inform decision making. How will we use this report to inform decision making? It's kind of the next bit.
So I note that the report is already being used. I saw the statistics were used in the submission that was being prepared at the moment to central government. I think there's a wide variety of ways it could be used. For example, there is the extra analysis of the land transport work, and the transport planners will be able to use all of that data. It does point to a few areas of work that we need to do, and it could be useful for our land use planning. It could be useful for waste planning. As ACOM pointed out, waste is one of the good news stories in this report. I'm starting to ramble because I think that it could be used in almost any aspect of council's work.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fields.
Thank you. It's very comprehensive. This is, I must commend you on the quality of the reporting, and it's the kind of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, really. And in particular, one of the very few chances where a pie chart actually works very well. So thank you for that.
Make a note of that.
So that's a bit of an in-joke there. But anyway, just on the clarification, just on the cruise ships thing, I guess it's on page 120, just the numbers. So the total emissions for FY23, and I know you've made the caveat about COVID-19 and that. So, but it's, I guess it's not surprising that emissions were lower for FY23, given that half of the year there were no cruise ships coming into Christchurch up until about November 2022. So in terms of, would it be a fair assumption, if you prorated that number, that 54,000, it would be probably closer to 100,000 if it was a full year, compared, because there were more cruise ships coming into Littleton than there were into Akaroa in pre-pandemic times. So I'm just, and if so, how do we get around those little statistical anomalies that may not necessarily tell us the full picture?
So I'm going to throw that question to ACOM to address first.
Yep.
Adam, are you? I'm happy to take that one. So I think it's a little bit dangerous, kind of doubling the number. I think it's fair to say that it would be larger. It all depends on not just how many are visiting. It depends on the type, the size, and where they're coming from. So there's a number of different factors that go into those different calculations. I would expect it to be larger if there were more ships coming, obviously, but I think it's very dangerous just to assume that it would be larger in FY22. It also depends on the trend of, of those years. We have seen greater increases coming back, and if you look across the figures, you'll see that scheduled cruise ship arrivals are up this year and are expected to trend up in future years.
Okay. Thank you. Is there? Can I just? I may as well just keep going. Do we have kind of like average emissions per ship kind of numbers, sort of underpinning these kind of numbers?
No, because like Lisa pointed out, this is the first time we've been able to include cruise ships, and there's quite a lot of difficulties with data around cruise ships, basically around how they refuel, where they refuel, and their propulsion units. A lot of them are running dual propulsion units, which complicates things, electric and diesel, which complicates things a lot in terms of measuring their emissions. So yes, unfortunately, there is no standard number I can give you that says per passenger or per room or per ship size their emissions.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Just completely different tangent, if I may. Just the on-road transport numbers. So as a thought experiment, if the entire road fleet in Christchurch transitioned to electric energy, and we might be getting ahead of ourselves here, sure, but do we have a sense of what those emissions, like the equivalent emissions, would look like for on-road transport? Do we have a kind of a sense of the sort of the proportionality between an electric vehicle and a fully petrol vehicle in terms of emissions output? I guess to put it another way, if everything was electric, would that be zero?
Yeah, it would depend on the electricity mix at the time. But even like coal-fired electricity is more efficient for an electric vehicle through efficiency of the motor and all those types of things than a diesel car or petrol car. But Adam probably can talk about, there's essentially different factors for diesel vehicles, for the size of vehicles, for electric vehicles, hybrids that you'd apply in there, but it would be significantly less than petrol. Adam, have you got thoughts on that, or Anthony?
Just off the top of my head, order of magnitude would be 10 times better from an emissions perspective.
Oh, that's quite helpful. No, that's cool. No, good. Just your ballparks are good. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Donovan, please. Done? Councillor Kewen.
Yeah, so I'm back on page 97. So the question, because the gross emissions decreased by 1.1% over that time, but our net emissions went up by 1%. And that was due to forest harvesting emissions, which caused that, which obviously we monitor forests. You planted this many trees, but they were that big, you cut them down. So whereas in a different year, it could be different. are we calculating in the number of trees that we've planted? Because also note when you look at the NASA website, the planet's got greener this century, not less greener. But a lot of that's not calculated because it's not forestry, it's reforestation. And is reforestation being counted?
So I'll let ACOM answer that question.
Because I think that's very important, because if as a council we plant 1 million trees but they're not counted because they're not a forest that's going to be cut down, then it's a different model.
It is counted because it's a land use coverage that's the basis of that factor, and the change in land use over time. So if you plant more native bush and more native trees, that will factor in to the calculations that are provided here. So you will see that increase over time. What you are seeing is you're seeing a level of exotics being planted, pine and other commercial timber, which are being planted and cut down in regular cycles, and that's often reflected in many of the figures here. So the land use coverage, the amount of different land uses, and the rates that they sequester carbon or store carbon and capture carbon is factored into this conversation here and this study. So if you plant 1 million trees, that will have an impact on the overall emissions level that you'll see in these reports. However, it might not be as fast as you think, which is what the general trend is. The difficulty is with native bush and native forest is that it sequesters carbon generally at a slower rate than exotic species do.
Yeah, so this report, that 3.14 would suggest that we've cut down more of our forests that we harvest, but they're all in a 30-year cycle. So are people getting out of forestry in Christchurch? That would be suggesting that they've cut it down, now they're going to run grass or houses or something instead of it becoming another pine forest.
It's difficult to see that long-term trend. I think that's fair to say. What we've tended to see elsewhere, and this may be different in the Christchurch area, is the relative amount of, in the past we've seen large movements from, say, forest to dairy farms, for example, classic example of that. However, we're at levels which are relatively static at the moment. Okay. So the commercial forestry is essentially still commercial forestry. They'll just be in the replanting phase.
Thank you.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions, please. I like these. I like these wee pictures. Now, these are all, when it says Ōtautahi Christchurch, this is more or less our boundary, is it?
Yeah, it's our geographic boundary, yeah.
Question, when it says old landfills, all the gas, the landfill gas that we're getting out of Burwood landfill heats this building. Right, that's where it comes from. And that is just about empty. We're having trouble getting enough gas out of it. And that's our youngest landfill. All the other ones that are in the city, in theory, must be inert, because if our youngest landfill was nearly empty, all the older ones must be past it.
It does decline over time. Adam might be able to, excuse me, Adam might be able to give you more. Like in
I'm
general,
just trying to, because when it says closed landfill, I assume that's like the old Bexley dump, for argument's sake. So if the youngest dump is Burwood at Bottle Lake, and that's empty of gas, all the older ones must be empty as well. So how are we measuring that?
I guess it's a different standard in terms of like actively producing gas on a commercial basis to heat a building versus seeping up through the ground in small amounts. But you're right, it does decline over time in a natural kind of cycle. But Adam, you can talk about the closed landfills or how you calculate those emissions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Those closed landfill sites are falling emissions from them. Carrie's point, I think what's probably happening with Burwood is that it's not producing enough to be able to generate this kind of electricity on a efficient scale. But there are emissions from essentially how we calculate it is all of the landfill that's been produced in Christchurch over the last 60 years. We're calculating the methane release from that, which is very small for something that was put in the ground 60 years ago. And we've seen probably about 20-25% decrease in those emissions over the last 4 years.
Okay, no, it just seems 55% seems quite a bit. The other question I've got is where it says stationary energy with coal in the confines of the city, have we taken into account that Christchurch Hospital and Burwood Hospital have changed from coal to wood to timber biomass? Is that in the calculations?
I'll answer that. As mentioned a bit earlier, the coal data is a bit lacking. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to get that detail, but hopefully in the future that will be able to be captured.
Okay, and lastly, this is just for your information. I was at a do the other day, and Dr. Rod Carr was there, and one of the really interesting things he told me, and you guys nodding your head as if I'm going to tell you what you already know, 80% of our heavy transport in the whole of New Zealand, our greenhouse gases, comes from just 800 trucks, and that wouldn't count any of the ones that are within the city, so to speak, because not the heavy transport ones don't come into the city much. Am I right in saying that?
Do you want
I don't know about that quote, that statistic, but heavy vehicles in Christchurch is going to be a reasonably substantial amount on road transport.
Okay, no, that's cool. Councillor Cotter?
Just one more. On page 132, and you've got their electric vehicles, and you have said, and you've already told us, that the buses, electric buses, are not included because in brackets they're reported separately. Why can't we include electric buses? I know even though they are run by Environment Canterbury, they're in our city. So I think by the time you did include electric buses, electrification of fuel buses will have a big impact, and also those two boilers, those two things together would actually, I think, quite drastically change this number.
Adam, do you want to address what's included?
Yeah, sorry, I think that's probably not super clear in that box there, but essentially what it's saying is the electric vehicles in that box isn't included there because electric buses are included in the electric buses category. So they are included.
They are, okay. Okay, that's different than what you told me before.
I know, yeah.
So they are.
Alrighty.
That's great, thank you.
Councillor Coker.
I was just thinking on that. By doing RUCs, which we talked about yesterday, if you did that on every vehicle, you get a much better assessment of petrol usage versus electric usage, wouldn't you? If you had every vehicle and you knew how many kilometres they were all doing. So that is that maybe should go into our, whatever we talked about yesterday, the GPS submission. Yeah.
All right, we're good. Okay, so I'm under the impression that Councillor Kieran was happy to move it. Is that what you said? And Councillor Templeton, sorry, are you still talking there, Melanie? Councillor Coker's happy to second it. Is that right? Okay. Is that right? Everyone happy? So I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Against? Oh, any debate? Righto. Sorry, here we're getting ahead of myself here. Who would like to debate first?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick this off and was happy to move this because I think it is really good going forward that and this being the first one, kind of sets a benchmark so then we can kind of see from there. And I am dubious of some of the numbers because I do disagree with the way we measure power using the national model. I think the South Island's a lot more efficient, but that's the tool that's commonly used. To find out that we've got a 1% increase in net increase in emissions after this many years, when our target is a 50% decrease by 2030, I was actually gobsmacked. I thought we'd be a lot further along the path than this, which is kind of brings to bear my worst fears that we've spent billions and got nowhere. And this is real money has been spent, a couple of $100 million on cycleways to address climate change, tens of millions, if not more than 100 million on bus lanes, bus upgrades, electric buses, new bus stops to increase public transport, not to mention all the other aspects of council business that we've done to reduce the footprint, what the airport's done, what private businesses has done, people switching to solar. There's been an incredible amount of money spent, and we've moved the dial by 1% net. That is alarming. If that was a business, you wouldn't be, your shareholders would vote you out. They would say you've failed miserably, and that's why we do have protesters come in here on a regular basis telling us we're failing miserably, because a 1% increase is an absolute miserable fail. And if we get to that 50%, that's undone by the world's population growth in 12.5 days anyway. But that aside, if we want to have an impact, and one of the ones Phil raised before was about the heavy trucks, when the government announced the $300 million SURF fund, that could have converted 200 trucks to being hydrogen, using green hydrogen, which would have saved 600,000 tonnes of carbon a year off those 2,000 trucks. That there would have been a huge step in the direction of reduction of carbon emissions. Science and math will solve this problem, emotions won't. And too often our decisions are driven by emotion, and they're not backed up by what are the net numbers that are going to be saved on every single dollar we spend. Money is not, it's not bottomless. We can't just magic up money to spend on projects. And as far as switching to electric goes, we've got to be even smarter than that. There's not enough copper in the world for the world's fleets to switch to electric vehicles. There's tons of reports on it, and on average it takes 16 years to open a copper mine. The world cannot do it. We have to be smarter, and hydrogen is one of those. And yes, there's a copper use in that, but it's not as much as full electric vehicles. There's tons of science that needs to be done. Our money should be spent on other things more wisely. We should be encouraging kids to stay in school on a Friday, maybe do all-day science every Friday to help solve the problems going forward. We should be, as a city, a thinking city that's churned out some of the smartest people ever, like Rutherford. We should be hosting a science fair every single year, which is helping solve the world's problems, because even us going net zero does not have, and it doesn't even dent the world's problems. We need to be reaching out beyond our country with solutions, and companies like Fabrum can do that. And kids that grow up in our city need the best education possible, because they can solve those problems. But spending north of $1 billion to not move the dial by 1% is just incredible, and it's a slap in the face of all those ratepayers and people that have got upset and passionate about climate change for it not to be moved. I'm not as upset about the climate change, I'm more upset about the pollution, because I look at all those numbers, and to me those are heavy particulates and pollution that has a very negative effect on the planet. And so that's why I get passionate about it, and I get really upset when we spend all of this money and literally get nowhere.
Thank you, Councillor Templeton.
Kia ora koutou. What I've just heard is talking about teaching kids to do things, and frankly, it's too late. It is too late for the kids to solve this problem for us. It is up to us. I've heard that we should host a fair, and that others should change before we should. None of that is good enough. Yes, we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars so far on putting in infrastructure to help people make a choice around their transport, but we have not yet finished those networks, and partly because those who gaslight the community and talk about climate change continually vote against the changes needed and continue to try and delay action that is needed. Ways of delaying action on climate change include individualism, include technological optimism. We plan to plan. People who accuse a policy of not being quite perfect enough, and therefore we should just plan some more or tweak a policy some more. Some areas are out of our control, out of our influence, but much of it is not. And we have not yet done enough as a city to enable people to make the choices that we're asking them to. We have not got a safe network of cycleways. We have some cycleways, but people who continue to vote against ones being implemented, and who continually try to, for example, use the new GPS as an excuse to get rid of cycleways in our long-term plan, do our city, our children and their future an enormous disservice. Many of the things we're trying to do will both help mitigate emissions and they will help us adapt to a really, really different future. Those who continue to try and delay action condemn our city, our children and their children to a city where the costs will be much, much greater than if we had acted now. Yes, we've spent $200 million on some cycleways, but in the same period of time, we've spent $2.1 billion on roads. If we put things in place but fail to make those shifts because we're not doing the right thing to influence the change, then that money would be wasted. And we don't want it to be wasted. We need to finish our cycleway network. We need to finish putting in place public transport futures, and those who delay that do our city a disservice. For those who say that they believe the science and climate change, who say that they believe in anthropomorphic climate change, and then make a deliberate decision not to act on it, that to me is a lot worse than those who don't believe the science, those who've been led down rabbit holes. So please be on the right side of history with our long-term plan coming up. Make sure that we follow the evidence and that we put the projects and the programs of work in place to help our residents change. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other debate before I put this motion? What are you doing now? Okay, go. You go. Put your hand up.
I just wanted to say that if we're going to talk about climate change and action, we all need to look at ourselves. The city can do so much, but if people don't, and the people that are here today wanting us to do take action on climate change and reach our targets, which we won't do, especially because the next time we'll see our region's results will be in 3 years. But anyway, we all need to take our own steps, and if we're not willing to do that ourselves, we cannot complain about the situation that we find ourselves in. Basically, is the point I want to make.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Barber.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I tend to agree with Councillor Coker there. I think that we should all be looking to do something in our own lives, in our own communities, as best we can. I follow this debate with a really interested attitude. What really strikes me about our emissions is how small they are in context of the rest of the world. And I know Councillor Templeton has pointed out to me that if all the smaller nations band together, we could make a significant impact. So I think we always need to be conscious of that. But sadly, the big decisions around climate change will be made elsewhere in the world, in China, in the United States, in India. I think we need to do the best we can, and I think we need to look at ourselves long and hard as to how we do this. The time for action basically is passing us by. Thanks.
Councillor Scandrett.
Yeah, the advantage of being a small country but with a Western type aspect is that we can be tested for things and look at the banking community. Bank cards, we were the first off the line. I remember going to England and being amazed that our friends didn't have any banking cards, and yet we were using them all over the place. So that could actually be the real edge that we have over the rest of the world, being a Western style small economy where things can be tested for the environment. And I think that's a real advantage with our technology advancements, etc. So there are some real opportunities being a small producer at the bottom of the world. And I think that we should be, as a council, encouraging central government and other councils to pursue those, especially in our technology areas where we say that we want to back them and push them, etc. I think there's some outstanding opportunities. Just takes time.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Cotter.
Thank you. Just look, I think this report is really good because it's actually enabling people to look at it and realise where we can all make the biggest impact, and we can see that it's in transport for most people. And I think the fact that this council is actually enabling people to make an effort by providing cycleways and alternative modes of transport And I think that's why we need to keep doing those, and noting that Councillor Templeton did point out that that project of the 13 major cycleways, which is one project, is not finished yet. And until it is finished, it won't show the true benefit. So I think this council, working with our waste reduction programs, is having a good effect as well. But basically, I just want to say, and I won't talk too long, that look, this is not a damning report at all. I think this is a good report. It's got some positives in there, and it lets people see what's going on. And I think let's keep going. There's no point in not keeping going. We've got to keep going. Our people, our Christchurch residents, are asking us to lead on this work. And I think this is a really good step in the right direction. I too am a bit disappointed in the 3-year lag for the next round of information. I think that's too long. Perhaps we can look at that. I did hear a funding issue called out over there, to resourcing because it's expensive, but let's see what we can do with that. So let's keep going, let's keep planting, let's keep building alternative modes of transport, and hope for positive results.
Thank you, Councillor Fields.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I just would like to support what my colleague Councillor Cotter just said. She really made the points I wanted to make. But I just applaud whatever your arguments around how we're going to get to the point we want to get to. The fact that we're measuring it in a really clear way is such a huge leap forward, and a great leap forward, if you might say, because prior to that, to this, we're basically trying to nail jelly to a wall and making some of our decision making. So now we actually can see where we're going, and okay, no, we can make the points we want to about cycleways and multimodal transport, but I'm going to engage in a little bit of technical optimism, because it's so clear that our 38% of our emissions are on road transport, and if we want to make real change, the biggest bang for buck we're going to get is getting people out of petrol-driven cars and into non-petrol-driven modes of transport. Like, that is so clearly and obviously the thing that we need to advocate for and to push for, because that is where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. So fantastic that we have a way to be able to see that now and to be able to make good, solid decisions in that direction. I look forward to working with everyone in that regard.
Councillor Peters.
Thank you. Yeah, great to get this view in the window with this report. So thank you to staff for bringing that to us, and looking forward to how we can start to draw on this report and actually make some decisions that can help shift the dial and try and get these emissions heading in the right direction. I really take my hat off to ECAN with their long-term plan they're consulting on currently, where they're trying to move towards shifting the dial significantly through enhanced public transport with more uplift on the routes and that sort of thing. And I would hope that we as a council will be more than happy and keen to work with them to try and get more people able to get into the buses, using our public transport to get their cars off the road, so that we can look at that large number in this report around the vehicles on the road being the largest source of our emissions, to actually start making a genuine dent in improvement in the situation. It frustrates me to see buses on many occasions stuck in traffic. I would like for us as a council to try and find a way to enhance ECAN's ability to deliver more reliable transport through, let's create more T2 lanes or the likes to be able to get free spaces for the buses to be able to move around, in and around our city efficiently and effectively, so people can actually then have a viable option to get out of their cars. Along with that, certainly I'm interested and keen to see cycleways around our city made more efficient, to not just complete the existing major cycle route plan that we've been working on for many years now, to find ways of more efficiently, perhaps value engineering cycleways, so that we can still make them a safe space for the cyclists, but also make it a more efficient network so people can get to and around and through between the major routes. Get those local connectors running so people can get out of their homes onto those routes and actually get around the city. We've got to find a way of moving the dial effectively, and I think we need to be a bold council going forward and look at ways of cost effectively making the changes so that we can move the dial on this. We're in hard economic times, so we can't just throw hundreds of millions of dollars at it. We've got to find ways of value engineering so that we can get the best bang for our buck and get the best and most efficient way for our city to be able to move in and around it. So looking forward to the outcomes we can try and bring from this.
Councillor Harrison-Hunt, please.
I've got a wee story actually, and it reminded me of the analogy that the elephant cares nothing of an ant until there are millions of them. And this issue here is multifaceted in a way, because it's not just about transport, it's not just about stationary energy, it's not just about agriculture, it's about all of those things making small incremental changes. And all of these I'm referring to as ants, because if we bring 1 million of them on board, then the big elephant in the room, which is climate change, is going to be completely inundated with these things. Now, I had a crash the other day on Thursday, actually, at 10 a.m. on the cycle lane, interestingly enough. And I wasn't going to talk about it too much, but one of the things that happened was a car driver actually cut me off because he didn't look where he was going into a driveway. I inevitably T-boned that car, and I was pretty banged up. Dislocated finger, banged up knees, and banged up mana. But what I did is actually thought nothing of it. It is Ramadan for myself. I'm fasting, so I've got to be a nice guy. I shook it off, said, mate, it's all good. Don't worry about it. And I moved on to my meeting on Dean's Ave. Throughout that meeting, I actually thought about that, and I reflected. And the things that I'm reflecting is, what if my daughter was on the shotgun seat that I use quite a lot? That could have been a whole lot worse. And that also made me think about the infrastructural changes that were needed, not only on our cycleways, but actually across the infrastructure across the city. There are safety issues across this whole broad range of things that we're doing as a council. And I'm counting my blessings because my daughter wasn't on the front of that shotgun seat when I actually crashed into that person who was heading to the mechanics. But there are things around modal shift which is really important. And this here is only one small blip in the things that we need to change. I actually agree with the sentiment of Councillor Peters around making sure that these cycleways are infrastructurally ready and sound, but I think we're going in different directions here. I think there needs to be more visibility on our cycleways. I think there needs to be more eyes on the road because it's going to be a modal shift where we have vulnerable people walking across roads, where we have cyclists, we have walkers, we have people in cars, and we have buses. I think it's multifaceted, and I think it's really important we reiterate that. Secondly, I also think that we need to be doing more as a council. We did ask things in the long-term plan deliberations about what measures are we doing around climate change, and still there's a few crickets in the room because we're not able to do the work because we're not ready to fund it yet. So I'm looking forward to the climate change for strike to come in here in April. I'm really looking forward to that strike coming in. I'll be there side by side, and I'm challenging the rest of this council to sit next to our young people to show exactly what it is we're needing to do in terms of climate. Kia ora.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Yeah, if we want to be serious about climate change rates affordability, we may wish to consider allowing housing to be built where there is already infrastructure. If we're continuing to build out and out on productive food growing land where there is no bus routes nearby, no footpaths, that won't help our productivity, won't help our climate targets, and it won't help rates affordability. Thank you.
And Councillor Donovan. Oh, they're coming out now. And then you, Young.
Just to pick up on the analogy of my esteemed colleague, Councillor Harrison-Hunt, we all know there's an elephant in the room, and we also know that to eat an elephant, you can only do it one bite at a time. So I think what this report makes clear is that we should be taking action, as my colleague has said, across all parts of council. So that's starting with on-road transport. We know that's the biggest bang for buck. And I agree with Councillor Kewen that the return on investment on building new roads hasn't yielded the result that we're looking for, and that actually what we should be doing is investing in mode shift, because we know that that's how we reduce our emissions most effectively. So I just want to support the call of my colleagues that we need to be pushing harder and faster. We don't have time on our side, and this is something that we can't be passing off to future generations. So I'm looking forward to seeing this come through as part of a long-term plan.
Thank you, Celeste. Councillor Johansson, please.
Thank you. I think it's really good that we're getting this information. Actually, Council adopted a climate smart strategy in 2010, and it was actually quite good, and it had a lot of things in it that we were going to do. And part of the problem is that we keep reinventing strategies instead of focusing on the actions that we say we're going to do and how we can achieve them. And I think if you look back to some of the tragedy of the last decade and a bit, is effectively we had an urban development strategy that enabled motorways to be built to two of the fastest growing regions in Canterbury, Selwyn and Waimak. So we've seen huge increase in people using motor vehicles coming in from those fast growing greenfield development areas into our city. So we can talk about doing little things in our city within, the generally the kind of core or the inner city or the suburbs that we have as a city. But the reality is that a lot of the transport emissions that we're faced with are the ones that are coming from the growth that is happening on the edge of the city, further and further into the Canterbury Plains. And we still don't have any sort of mass rapid transit system that can take people out of cars and into more sustainable means of transport from those major areas, right? We're still doing things like someone mentioned around the bus priority lanes. Go and look at what's happening in Papanui and Main North Road, and look at all the development that we're enabling to occur, allowing to occur, and all the traffic lights that are being put in to make it safe for people to enter the supermarkets, but actually congesting the traffic and delaying the buses even further than the expense that we've spent on putting bus priority lanes. So we need to get much more holistic in terms of land use planning, and we need to think a lot more strategically about how we're developing as a city and as a region to get more sustainable outcomes. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but the key thing is understanding the difference that we're making with the actions that we take. And I think today is a start towards doing that, which is really good. We do need to have consistency, and we do need to have a joined up approach. And we've got, ECAN, Mayoral Forums, Greater Christchurch Partnership, all working in this climate change space, and yet we still don't have a kind of standardised way of reporting. So hopefully we can get on top of that and start to get consistent, common information that we can benchmark against each other. And finally, I'll just say that, it's really good to get the information about the cruise ships. We have the ability to do things now rather than wait around things like environmental levies on things that produce carbon emissions. So let's start doing that, right? Let's start looking at the source of the emissions, like the cruise ships, and putting in place mechanisms, whether it's through CCHL or LPC or our own fees and charges, to reduce the impact that they have, or at least to get an offset to put in place measures to mitigate the harm that they're causing. That's very simple, and it can be done. Let's do it.
Councillor Kewen, please.
Yeah, I knew there'd be a division of views here. There always will be. That's the population we represent as well, so that's great. But boy, how unaspirational were those speeches? To talk about a bit of mode shift, some cycling and things, and if you go to the Greater Christchurch website here and you get the numbers of people that drive in vehicles, 62% of trips of one person with a passenger is 21%. These are Christchurch numbers. Pedestrians 12, cyclists is 3, that is growing, and public transport is 2, and that's hovered. So yes, 2.1 billion spent on roads, 200 million spent on cycleways. The numbers don't lie. That's a 10 to 1, but that's not the numbers of what use them. Roads are used for other things other than just single vehicle drivers. They transport the food you eat. They transport kids to school. They transport the medicines that people need. They get you to hospital, nowhere to park, but they can get you there. These roads have important things. The only countries without roads are third world banana republics. Beyond that, you cannot have a way of life that the people of this country are so lucky to have without having roads. Which brings me to my big point, is that mankind has never gone backwards. You can have all the behaviour change you want, and that's great to aspire to, but you cannot get everyone on board to that behaviour change. We, as leaders and as city administrators, it's our role to facilitate the way people want to live their lives, not dictate to them how to live their lives. So if people are going to drive, we need to make sure the vehicles don't have an impact on the environment. They also don't hurt people. But we can't say, oh, you can't use your vehicle, drive to hospital with your half leg hanging off after your accident. You need vehicles to get people around. You need vehicles for food. You need vehicles for medicine. It is unrealistic to go backwards. Mankind will strive forward, and once we start treating this as a disaster, the only disaster here is the numbers, the 1% increase in emissions over that time. We only got there because of COVID, and it cut into the number of flights that still haven't recovered yet. We need to be way, way smarter and more aspirational, and I don't believe this council's leading in that field at all. So we need to lift our game a lot.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. So that here ended the lesson. We are now standing up for a karakia. Thank you.
Sorry, our screen's frozen, so just can't see.
And here she is. Right. Kia. Tapu. Tapu. Tiara. Kisturu. Wakataka Pai. Kisturu. Wakataka Pai. Homea. Tahie. Thank you very much, everyone.